This your boy James, and you are now in tune for the 79th Street Podcast. And when I mean 79, I just mean my thoughts and perspectives from growing up on the south side of Chicago. So let's get it. How y'all doing? My name is James Alfred, and this is the 79th Street Podcast. On this podcast, we're going to go over everything from, higher ed, college issues to sports, politics, and quite frankly, whatever I want to talk about, depending on the day. So this first episode, I just want to kind of talk to you all about some of my experiences into getting into the higher ed student affairs realm. I'm a product of Chicago Public Schools. I went to Kenwood Academy. From there I graduated, got a BA in political science from Northern Illinois University. And after that, I went on to get a Master of Science in Adult Higher Education. Now, some people say, when did you know that you wanted to be in higher ed? It probably was the year I was graduating. That's when the concept of higher ed and student affairs was being drilled into me. In high school, I thought I was going to be a politician. I was going to go work and be some big time politician. And so to go into higher ed, it was kind of a journey and something I was exposed to from being in college. Being in college and being in some of the spaces. So I was a student working in 4 different departments throughout my college experience. So I've always worked at the Center for Black Studies, and just being around Dr. Guyan, she always used to say don't pay for grad school. If you go to grad school, they should be paying you to go there. And so that was one thing that kind of always, stood out, to me, over the years. All right, I shouldn't be paying. If I go, they need to be paying me to go. So that was one thing that stood out. I did go to grad school at my undergrad institution, and some people, you'll hear a lot of talk where I heard all this talk of, oh, you shouldn't do it, people aren't going to hire you, you're not going to be marketable. Quite frankly, I did it. And I did it, and I felt like it was the best decision, and I would do it again because, one, I had a graduate assistantship, so the classes were paid for. I had a 20-hour-a-week graduate assistantship, and I got my monthly stipend. But also, outside of that, I was really involved, starting at a point in high school, undergrad, and even grad school, where, in high school, this is not a joke, but my peers, I was nominated most likely to join everything for our senior superlatives. And I think I lived up to that reputation because in undergrad I was involved a lot, and even in grad school. Going to grad school opened so many more doors to me because I stayed at NIU. There was opportunities where hey, you want to teach this class? Hey, James can be on the committee. Oh, you know what? He can not only be on the committee, he could run this committee. Or, different advisors saying hey, you can co-advise this student organization with me, which is giving me hands-on experience, which I'm quite frankly using now as a professional. So just grateful, for that. And I think one of the biggest things is I helped plan and execute a trip of taking 50 students to the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March, my first semester of grad school. That itself was major because, I just wanted to go. I'm not gonna lie. I was content with going as a student. And then I remember going to the meeting and they was like, James, you can go. You got the employee ID number. You can be a chaperone. I was like, huh? And to me, that was just kind of Whew. But leading up to how I end up going to grad school, so it's kind of like a journey. So indirectly, my hall director was kind of advocate and pushing, for me to go. I got to run into Martise like last year. He actually came to my job, with his current work, um, and he was doing some stuff, and we got to talk for about 20 minutes, and he was just like, "Hey, I'm proud of you, and the progress you made from that kid I met as a freshman." So I met Martise as a freshman, where I don't want to say I was naive, but I wish I knew now what I knew then. I wish and pretty much I was the hall council president, so that led me to be really involved with the Residence Hall Association, where, I was my hall council president of the building I lived in. I was a committee chair in the association. And then over my first 2 years, I got to go to 3 conferences with them, just, you know, applying, and they were great opportunities, which kind of opened my eyes up a little bit more to student affairs. And I say this to say it, we're like, taking that hall council route, you learn a lot. And you learn a lot, whereas, you're learning how to politics, you're learning some of the players, around campus. Like as a freshman, I had lunch with the president and our VP of Student Affairs, and that was because I was the hall council president. Like the hall director had to set some up. I was one of the go-to people that was on the first line to just make that happen. And when I tell people that, people be like, "Whoa," and I'd be like, "Yeah." I was like, I couldn't believe it, but that was feeding me as this eager young political science major student, where I was like, this is the type of stuff I want to do because I had done stuff like this before. So fast forward, I joined a lot of stuff in college. So I did student government, I did the Black Student Union, the Campus Activities Board. I was a member of TRIO, mentoring program, S Plan. So there's a lot that I did, and all of that goes into being a higher ed professional because you learn how to work with students, talk to the parents, see the needs, and not saying I was best equipped, but I feel like one of the best things as a professional now is that I'm going into so much of my experiences as a student, whereas I remember some of this stuff like it was yesterday. And so that helps make me a better advisor, mentor now because some of that stuff is firsthand experience for me. So I'm just grateful to have had some of those experiences, and they give you stuff to put on your resume, whereas like yes, I had jobs, but some of the extracurricular stuff stands out where like I was the treasurer of the programming board. When I go in and tell people like, oh, I oversaw a budget of, $300,000, people like, huh? I'd be like, yeah, like, that was the budget and I was in charge of, managing that. And that's just something where, being involved makes way for great exposure and more opportunities, and it's gonna pop out, on your resume. But back on track to the student affairs route, I want to shout out my bro Levon, one of my fraternity brothers. Although we took different routes, Levon was definitely there when I was trying to, make grad school happen. Like I remember, you know, one time I was leaving class, I took an intro to student affairs class, my last year, and I remember I was walking from class and Gable Graham, and I run into Levon. He's like, "Oh yeah, bro, you going to the open house?" I'm like, "What open house?" I'm like, "I just came from class." He said, "Oh, it's an open house for the grad program." He said, "And this right up your alley." And in undergrad, I used to dress up like every day, so I'm pretty sure I already had like a shirt in town. That might not matter to some people, but to me it mattered. And I was like, I ended up going on a whim. Like he told me, I went right there. And I ended up going. I ended up liking some of the stuff I was hearing, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm taking this class right now." that go in with us. I was like, oh, yeah, that's good there. They said, definitely put that on the application. We'll take that into consideration, and things of that sort. And there was another thing where I remember going to OPE, the Oshkosh Placement Exchange, and Levon hit me up like, yeah, you trying to go? He said, I'm going. And Levon was a RA, residential advisor, so that was kind of his way into, doing it. And I'm like, cool. End up signing up, signed up, and then I just started looking at the website because you just get access to this portal, and I psyched myself out. I psyched myself out to the point where I'm like, man, nobody gonna pick me. All of these jobs, housing, and this and the other. And I'm like, man, and I low-key had told Levon I'm not going. And Levon like, bro, you just paid the money. I'm like, I'm not going. Then I started getting emails and messages like, hey, we want to interview you. We like your resume, this and the other. And I'm like, okay, I'll go do these interviews because I know I needed to practice going into the real world or whatever was going to happen after I graduated. And we end up going and tell you how, I guess, dedicated we were. So since Levon was going, I assumed he had a hotel room. I assumed. We drove 3 hours up. And I think on the ride, like, oh yeah, we still got to find a hotel. I'm like, bro, I thought you had one. He said, nah, I just rather do it when we get there. The good thing is we found a hotel. But to me, that was just funny. We're like, we just kind of went up there with like no care in the world and just made it happen. I think over the weekend, we both did probably about 10, 12 interviews each. And that was a really intense 2.5 days. And the good thing of it is that we got the network, we got to do some interviewing. It was some follow up interviews, but I think it was just a good experience to get me in the habit of doing some things like that to go into grad school. So I remember, fast forward, it was a couple programs I didn't apply to that I came in contact with OPE. Good conversations, but they didn't seem like the right program for me. Some for obvious reasons. End up applying to NIU, and I remember getting in, and it was like, hey, I got in, and I kind of found out I got in before the acceptance letter came because when you're still a student there, I was logging in checking grades or something. Before I got the notice, I was officially in. I remember I was in Miss Curry's office and Miss Curry just jumped up. She was excited because I had got into the grad program. And at this point, I knew it was only one more thing I needed to do. And that one more thing was secure a graduate assistantship. And I remember at first, I didn't get one. I did this thing at school called GSARP. Had about 4 interviews, struck out, didn't get any of them. I went 0 for 4. And I remember a friend, Lauren, who was my supervisor when I was a tour guide, was like, hold on, you got into grad school, you don't have a graduate assistantship? I was like, nah. She was like, you was like one of the best workers we had when I was there. Putting a word to the supervisors. They came and, set up an interview. Now, I ain't gonna lie, they kind of had me nervous for a second because the first interview ended up getting rescheduled. And it was because the assistant director who I would be working under was out sick. And so I was like, oh, and they was like, oh my gosh, we're sorry. And I've done a lot of interviews over the course of life. And I remember I did the interview, and the interview just was like a right fit. Like, the first question they came out, they asked me about my study abroad trip off the back, and I was like, oh, y'all rocking with me because that's easy. Can't nobody tell me about studying abroad in China if you haven't been to China. So they opened up with that question, and the interview just kind of went. And literally, not even 24 hours later, they sent me an offer like, hey, boom, this for you. Like, we want you in our office. And I ended up taking it. I was like, hey, what I got to lose? Like, it's a new office. I hadn't worked with. And so I was just excited to just get a new experience because I said, like, hey, as much as I love the Center for Black Studies, I wasn't going to take a graduate assistantship there. I was going to find something else. And fast forward down the line, I remember, talking to my supervisors, both Brian and Randy, and they was adamant. They was like, hey, when we interviewed you, we were just like, why is this kid still on the table? Why haven't anybody picked him up? And it was just their blessing. Like, okay, that's meant for us to get. And I had two of the best years working in that office. I learned a lot. And those are people who I can still call to this day, for things where I'm utilizing Brian as a reference, for jobs. And he let me know, like, hey, this place just called. Randy wrote a letter of recommendation for me for a PhD program. So all in all, it worked out, and I did what I was supposed to do and making the right connections with those people while in grad school. But fast forward a bit, as I'm coming to, the tail end of grad school, I remember it was the summer before my last year, and one of my buddies, Alandis, was getting ready to transition out to a new school, and we just trying to check in with each other, enjoy the FaceTime because we were both black in higher ed, and Alandis was a professional at the time, and I was still in grad, but it was just all love, both ends, where he would check in, he would ask me to do stuff, come to events, and so forth and so on, and I can go to him for advice. And I remember him telling me, like, James, if you're going to do this, you got to be critical of people, because one of the notions is higher ed is easy, and I've heard it too. Like, a lot of people who probably had no idea going into higher ed or student affairs were saying, like, oh yeah, I'm going to grad school. And you ask them, they be like, higher ed. And you'd be like, what? And it's kind of be shocking. They're like, well, it's easy, and I'm just trying to get a master's degree. And I'm not going to lie, although I felt like the program was easy, I felt like I belonged there because of the experience and the passion for the work versus some of these other people. Like, I'm trying to go to grad school for free. It's going to be an easy degree. And I remember Landis telling me, was like, hey, don't let people think that because they think it's easy. Some of them will come in there and not get the grades needed to do the program. Just because somebody else says something is easy don't mean it's easy. And also, you got to be critical of people. You got to ask them those tough questions. I'm like, bro, you're right. And so a lot of times when I hear people saying, like, oh, I want to go to grad school for higher ed, I got a higher ed program, I'm not going to lie, I ask a couple questions, just to see where their mindset at, to make sure that they're a right fit, because we already have a huge issue of higher ed where there are a lot of people in higher ed, but there's not enough jobs. And you have a lot of people who have no care in the world to be in higher ed, and it's just a job, versus, somebody that's passionate, that wants to be there. So that's kind of one of the issues in higher ed that, that I've noticed in my short time in. And so you kind of, not saying you want to stop them people, but you kind of want to weed them out and let them know, like, this ain't as sweet as you're going to think it's going to be. And if you don't have a passion for it, you quite frankly shouldn't be here. So I definitely ask questions to people just to see, like, hey, what are your intentions in the program? What are your goals? What are you looking to do? And a lot of times it's received very well. I haven't come across a notion like yet, but I have definitely called people out where, like, why higher ed? What do you think you're going to do? All in all, my journey to now has been good. I'm a Trio alum and just grateful that my first job out of grad school was working in Trio. And I remember just getting that call and just getting that support from the Trio staff when I was transitioning over, like, hey, I got this Trio interview, and they was like, you're gonna be perfect, like, that's right up your alley. And I remember I was like stressing, 'cause I'm like, I can do this job, but I just wanted to make sure I crossed my T's and dotted my I's. So calling up the former director of the Trio program we had at NIU, like, Pastor Wright, I need you. What advice can you give me? LeBryant was still working on campus, so I was visiting him, like, LeBryant, I got this job. What do you recommend? And I ended up getting a job. And so to be a Trio alum and my first job at a grad school was working in a Trio program. That was really dope for me. And the students really received it well because the students were like, James, you real, and it was because I was from the south side of Chicago and I could relate to the students. Like we had mostly Latinx students and they were just like, James, you real, we rock with you. And when I would speak, they would listen, because you could add in the educational part of it, but also you can give them the real deal Holyfield with just growing up in the streets. And they was just like, dang, and so, to this day, I still keep in contact with some of those students, although like I'm not at that job. Those students still keep in contact with me. And it's just because of those experiences where, not saying you didn't sugarcoat things, but I was always 100 and real with them, and just told them like what it was from jump. So like, and pushing them to be better students. That's the one thing I always did, especially if a student was willing to listen. I pushed them, you know, out of their comfort zone, and I think that's important. Where we live in our comfort zones a little, too much, and so if I can, I was pushed out of my comfort zone. So I do it within reason. I know I can't do it with every student, but I know some students are gonna bite, and some students are gonna have great success if they're pushed. Being in higher ed is one thing I don't take for granted. And I say that because, representation matters. People don't understand how many spaces that I've walked into and I've been the only black male, the only male of color, the only person of color in some instances. So I take it very serious, when I'm doing my work where, I've had students just when I started at my new job recently, since October, I have a student come for an advising meeting and was like, "Oh, you're my advisor?" Was a transfer student from another school. I've never had a black advisor before. And to me, it shook my hand and was just excited, and his face lit up. And I don't take, those situations, lightly. And for granted, I think that's a reason that kind of motivates me to stay in the field of higher ed, to work my way up, to stay around because of just encounters like that where you can truly save the lives of students. And people say, like, what you mean save the lives? Like, I have a lot of practical experience. And what I mean practical experience is whereas I wasn't the 4.0 student, I've been on academic probation. So I've seen the good and the bad of college. And I'm here now. Like, you know, I've been on academic probation where you got to get your grades up or you going home. So I've survived the worst of the worst and I'm still here. So some of those experiences make for a great conversation and it helped make me better at my job. Like I wouldn't tell you how many times that, I'm talking to students and students, I love them because they see you as this perfect person. Like, they think we all got 4.0s because we're their advisors and it's nothing. I tell them, I was like, no, I was like, I've been on academic probation. I said the difference between me and a lot of other people is I never gave up. I fought. I was resilient. I just wanted to be better because I had a lot of people looking up to me and I had a lot of people invest a lot of time and energy where I necessarily didn't want to disappoint them. And looking back, there was probably disappointing moments, but in the grand scheme of things, I think I made a lot of people proud because when you see a kid that's first generation, the first in his family, to go to college, and we all can admit, we may find a cousin or two that's probably been to college. I know because I had an older cousin that went, but because my parents didn't go or grandparents, that made me first gen. But when you're the first person, and I know for a fact on my dad's side of the family with a master's degree, that just kind of changes the whole narrative and ballpark on just what you can accomplish and all the things you can do. So I'm just grateful to just have that drive. And I want to share a quote with you all from Eric Thomas. So Eric Thomas is probably my favorite motivational speaker. I got to see him for the first time last year in Chicago, and he didn't disappoint. But the quote is, "You might be smarter, your family might come from privilege, your daddy might own a company, but you will not outwork me." And I feel like that's been my life, whereas I've never been the smartest person in the room, which is great because you never want to be the smartest person in the room. You want to be surrounded by people that are smarter than you. But the one thing that people can't take away from me is just my work ethic. Like, I'm always willing to work hard. I'm willing to get my hands dirty. I'm willing to do what's needed to be done. And I think that stands out in a greater scheme because somebody's gonna notice all that work you're putting in, and it's just gonna make for a better success story because you're gonna get the things that you're asking for. And if you think you don't belong in a space, I promise you, you belong. So to wrap this podcast up, I want to thank everybody for just listening. I hope I can offer some insight for you, a relative. If you have any suggestions on topics, some things you want to see, just let me know. But I do plan on doing this, more. And so I'm definitely going to focus a lot on just kind of the higher ed, college stuff, because I'm pro college, I'm pro grad school. And so whatever I can do, whatever insight I can give to people, I'm willing to give it so that way we can have more people of color in grad school. But just so you make it through. I've seen so many people go through the notions of college, grad school, and not make it out. And I feel like if they had the right mentors, the right habits, it would have been a-okay for them. Or if they just felt like they had the support. So a lot of times students leave some of these schools because they don't feel supported, and the support method kind of, I don't want to say it's on the student, but sometimes it is. They just never made any connections to the campus. You can't make a connection to campus if you're going home every weekend. And I think a lot of people, like, I didn't work my first year of college, so going home wasn't always an option. There was good weekends and there was bad weekends. But at the end of the day, I was able to thrive, become a part of the community, make a difference, have fun, and become a college student. So, I want to thank you all for joining us for the 79th Street podcast. Kind of what came into that name, if anybody that really knows me know that in life I grew up off 79th Street, and I get it. There's always a lot of negative connotation with it. I hope with this podcast we kind of change it because there are some great things happening. There are some great individuals that come from these parts. But on the other part of it is just I want to bring awareness to, what's going on, what can happen when somebody believe and what they can do and have the support from those around them. So I want to thank you all for joining me. And if you have any questions, comments, please let me know. And any topic suggestions, I think that's going to be important. The next episode is going to be on how to become a master student. So if you're a college student, if you're in school, check that one out to see how can you become a master student. Thanks. Have a great day.